Yes,
Yes, please. Okay. So, good evening, everyone. I hope you can hear us clearly and you can see us all. So, welcome to today's webinar. We are absolutely delighted to present this webinar today. It's a webinar on pearls in pediatric neurology. And the way we are going to do it today is through a panel discussion. Common scenarios that pediatric consultants see and us pediatric neurologists see. And the idea was that we always have an overlap. And it's good to have an interaction on these cases where we do on a day-to-day basis anyway. So why not have it also on a platform, and together we can think about some cases, their differential diagnosis, investigation, management, etc. First of all, for today's webinar, Ankit bhai, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay. A very sad news. One of our friends, a senior pediatrician from Ahmedabad, Dr. Upendra Vitlani, he sadly passed away on 10th of July due to COVID. This is a very upsetting and sad news, and I would like to request our sir, Dr. Baldev Prajapati, to share some thoughts on him, please.
Good evening, friends. I think at the beginning of this academics, it's very certain that all of us are highly disturbed since last 1 week. The reason we know that we lost very dynamic one of our friends, Dr. Upendra Vitlani. He was practicing at Sanpur, nearby Maninagar, quite senior. I think must be more than 55 years old. I specifically remember him because when I was full-time assistant professor in BM Medical College, I think 85, 86, he was working as a registrar. He was very close to me since then. And after starting his practice, he used to call me very frequently for various patients. He used to discuss with me, very regularly attending our clinical monthly meeting, always talking with a smiling face, and very good, I will say, academic person in this pediatrics also. Unfortunately, he developed this COVID-19, fought for almost more than 1 month. Everything was tried, whatever is possible, Unfortunately, ultimately we lost one of our friends. We know it's a great loss to all of us, great loss to the family, but we know that it is beyond our control. Let us pray Almighty God to give this eternal peace to this departed soul of Dr. Upendra Vitlani. Om Shanti.
Om Shanti.
Om Shanti. So our thoughts and prayers are with his family, and I'm sure if he was here today, he would have definitely joined this webinar and would have been with us. Next slide, please, Ankit bhai. Okay, so I'll proceed with that to the event. So the way we are doing it is that we have 3 very senior pediatric experts from Ahmedabad. They all are practicing pediatricians in private setup, in semi-government private setups, and we almost every week interact with them on cases. So we thought, why not also do it and share it with our friends who can learn probably a few things from that. With me will be Dr. Dr. Nitish Vora, my colleague and senior pediatric neurologist, and Dr. Sanjeev Mehta, my colleague and pediatric neurologist again. Next slide. We just wanted to remind you that tomorrow also at the same time, on the same link, we will be coming up with our second day of this program. And we have 3 eminent speakers from Gujarat, all pediatric neurologists, and they will be talking on basics of imaging in pediatric neurology, an interesting talk on vitamin B12 and neurological disorders, and to finish off in a simplified way, pediatric stroke. So do join us tomorrow as well. Next slide. So, Nitish, why don't I hand over to you to introduce our 3 experts today?
Yeah, so we are very lucky to have the gems of pediatric faculties from the Gujarat, from the Ahmedabad, and whom to introduce first. So we start with Baldev sir. Baldev bhai, we know he's an academician, he's a clinician. From his academics, he has been gold medalist, and of course serving GCS Medical College as the head of the department professor. He has lots of academic interest, lots of post and commitment and dedication towards IAP academic parts. Has served as a president of IAP Gujarat as well. And of course, he has authored essential procedures in pediatrics and published more than 90 articles in peer-reviewed journals. So we have very academic and clinical expert with us, Dr. Baldev Prajapati. So we welcome you.
Thank you.
Sir. Next, we have another very eminent pediatric consultant and very senior physician consultant, Dr. Abhay Bisha. We know he's again very good clinical work and academic work with being committed to IAP learning part, executive board member, chairperson of infectious disease chapter in 2015, and convener of IAP action plan for 2021, which we will be seeing. He's also on editorial board for so many activities and clinical activities you can see, and we are very, very fortunate enough to have another senior expert with us. Welcome you, sir.
Thank you so much.
And third, our young, dynamic, means of course we all young, but Chetan bhai is more young with his dynamism. And of course, very good clinician, senior pediatrician, and is a practicing traditional neurologist at Neha Hospital, Ahmedabad. He has worked in academic field and of course contributing to that a lot, was in Unimed Hospital, as well as past president of AOP. We know that he has done fantastic job there, and currently on so many board helping IAP and doing lots of nice academic and clinical work. Again, welcome, Dr. Chetan bhai.
Thank you.
So with 3 very eminent scholars, I think let's go to the next slide and we start with our clinical things. So we have this theme as a learning and sharing. These are going to be clinical discussion. These questions are there which we will discuss openly. And as a participants, colleagues, if you have any questions, you can write down the chat box, which we'll discuss at the end. So all the questions will be discussed at the end. So do keep write down your question. Next slide, please. So to start with, we have a 6-day-old child. So preterm, tried well, and was admitted at day 4 with the neonatal jaundice, which was not that high, bilirubin of 13.2, and at that stage, complete blood count and CRP were within normal limits. On the day 6, he had irritability followed by lethargy. And again, what the translator said, the CBC, CRP electrolytes were normal and bilirubin was coming down. So despite bloods normally improving, child was irritable. But because your irritable and lethargy shifted to another NSU, where it was at a more of a bigger center, they did the bloods because of irritable lethargy, as we all do, had the blood test as well as CSF. CSF was very high, 402, and CSF showed a high protein of 326, sugar almost nails near 1, and a huge count of more than 20,000. No RBCs in that, and 90% had polyps. So this is the clinical summary was available to us, and this was a phone call discussion as happened. Someone calls from the PSU or a colleague from somewhere outside, like this is child, what should we do? Can you next slide, please? Chetan bhai, if it's okay, I will start with you. So like if we are all sitting on the phone and someone calls from the somewhere outside to say this is a child, please help us. What information, more information would like to have on looking for?
I think because as you showed, this patient was preterm born, 35-weeker, was kept in NICU for say third and fourth day or fifth day before patient was transferred here. So one thing would like to ask is whether child was receiving any antibiotics before the patient was transferred to this other nursery. That is one thing, because that will give me a hint that already patient was received some antibiotics. Yes, as such, in simple hyperbilirubinemia, people should not give any antibiotics, but because they have investigated for CBC and CRP at that moment also, so we never know if they were suspecting anything and they have started antibiotics or not.
Sure.
That will change my line of action now. Second thing is the condition of the patient as such. At present, what is the hemodynamic condition hemodynamically, whether the patient is settled or not, that is important. And what you gave the counts and everything, CRP is very high, and typically CSF is a clear-cut picture of meningitis. That is very clear, evident. But yes, in CSF examination, I think few more things we need to understand, that we need to have a gram stain report if it is available. And yes, we must have sent the blood sugar along with that CSF. So that thing is important for me. And also the CSF blood culture also, whether it has been sent or not. So I would be asking for gram stain and blood sugar. Simultaneously would be waiting for blood culture and CSF culture. So that will give me the idea what am I doing to and how severe I'm going to do.
That's great. So I think these are very sensible questions we all deal with. And so luckily, child was not started on any antibiotics before the next transfer. So that was good because they thought CBC, CRP was normal. So let's just see what's happening. And they had sent the blood culture and CSF culture was also sent. I don't know the gram stain because this was not available to us. But again, very important point what Chetan bhai say. Like, don't just focus on meningitis, focus on the child, focus on the clinical condition, not on the reports. So I think this was just an ice-breaking question to say this is a classical bacterial meningitis we were thinking of in a newborn or a preterm infant. Sir, if I move to either Baldev sir, which organism do you consider in this age group, especially preterms and just newborns?
I think already it was discussed that the baby was born. It was preterm, but without any problem. And I hope that must have been sent at home. After that, probably for the exaggerated jaundice, child was brought. Later on, after 2-3 days, baby developed meningitis. The reason, we tried to locate that what is the likely source of infection. I think here nowadays we know that early onset, late onset hardly makes difference in the organisms, but yes, it makes difference in the source of infection. And second thing, what even Chetan said is very important, whether the child received the previous antibiotics or not. Suppose, and on the contrary, once baby is in NICU, all of us know that our routine practice of the friends, that for the jaundice or for even just observation or for anything, being the newborn, most of the time they receive the antibiotics. And any baby develop these meningitis who has received the previous antibiotics with NICU admission, presume that organisms are difficult. And for that reason, choice of antibiotics will be different. I think here, but if we go into the details, that it was probably, as you said, fortunately antibiotics were not given. Baby was at home, and probably jaundice also might have been exaggerated due to the sepsis. So sepsis must have developed at home. During the part of the sepsis, even the exaggeration of the jaundice. I think further progress of that infection led to the acute bacterial meningitis. If you go for this analysis, I will consider that the likely source of infection is the community. Unless you have asked or even you have seen such some skin infection, staphylococcal or something, then you may consider. If it is not that, then most common organism we know that it's a gram-negative. And for that, we'll have to go for these empirical antibiotics because still we do not know the exact organism. If you are after the culture, you may change it. Having this consideration, I don't consider hospital acquired or even the previously antibiotics given. For that reason, I will go for the basic antibiotics. And I think for the meningitis, I will go for the ciprofloxacin, higher doses, and the aminoglycoside. I think in the older children, we don't go for this aminoglycoside, but here in these children, definitely we'll have to go. Ciprofloxacin at least 150 to 200 milligram per kg per day, divided in even the 6, 7 or 8 hourly intravenously. Aminoglycoside, commonly we go for amikacin 15 milligram per kg per day. Best is to go for single dose, IV infusion over 30 to 45 minutes. And I'm sure that probably let us see that the response to our antibiotics. But with this background, with this history, empirically we can start the ciprofloxacin. I think ceftriaxone is best drug we know, but in newborns we avoid having these several issues. And unless you don't have any other way, that's only suppose if you get the sensitivity, then you may have to use it. But empirically, we go for the choice of the. I think some people even add the ampicillin, but I think that may not be routine for us, keeping in mind the listeriosis. That listeriosis will not be covered by the cephalosporins. But I think at present, we don't have this from the report or I will say literature of our country. It's not most common organism. Of course, occasionally reportings are there. That also we should keep in mind. But I think empirically, we may not go for addition of ampicillin. At present, ciprofloxacin, amikacin, keeping in mind further response of the baby and further availability information from the reports.
So no, that's very helpful. Means how you approach early or late onset sepsis, what organisms we think and what we start. So that's a very helpfully covered, sir. Abhay, sir. Of course, this seems very clear, but life is not always that smooth as we see. And we have lots of confusion. So I'm not just requesting to comment on this CSF, but in general, the scenarios which we see that partially treated, sometimes bacterial, sometimes viral. So how do you interpret CSF in the newborns?
Before I comment on this, I would like to have one word about this antibiotic choice. See, the cell count in CSF is more than 20,000.
Yes, sir.
Because it's just one. It's a premature child. Probably child might be in a stage of septic shock. I don't know, but it must be. So at least if the child is what Brother Badabhai has told, what Dr. Chetan has told, absolutely I agree with them that we should start with the basic antibiotic. But if child is really moribund shape and looking at the CSF value and actually hypoglycemia, just one sugar, probably looking after looking at the child, I might have preferred to act very hard, and probably meropenem would be my drug of choice. It has excellent CSF penetration, but again, it all depends upon the condition of the patient. I agree with both our special experts, previous experts. Now, as far as CSF is concerned, number one, that CSF in general is a tricky situation because to find a antibiotic naive child is always a tricky, and therefore we usually end up in two situations, and we are always our report will just look like a aseptic meningitis or it just look like a partially septic meningitis. And beyond the neonatal period, especially 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, we are often confused with tuberculous meningitis, and often we have seen that empiric AKT has already been tried. But that part we are not leaving it. We are now considered only on a young, fresh neonate who is in less than 1 month of the child or below the age of 3 months of child. Now, as far as the neonatal meningitis is concerned, when they are ill, when they are septic, they are more prone to hypoglycemia, number one. As a result of the hypoglycemia, the CSF sugar level is also very tricky. Second important thing that the cell count is always what I would say that this CSF does not become that sterile even after starting antibiotics. Especially when there's a gram-negative infection, the response is not good as we find it in older children in 20-40. So these are situations that makes that the CNS become tricky, especially in pneumomeningitis.
No, that's very helpful. So very precise clinical, what should we do? And it's not just single numbers that we see child as a whole and all the parameters. That's very helpful, sir. Thank you very much.
It is one point.
Sir, please.
I think very important why the point is regarding the CSF examination of the neonates. The figures which we are used to see in the older children regarding the cell, protein and sugar is absolutely different for the newborn. And unless probably the person is knowing, then he will be confused. Number one, regarding the sugar, please remember very frequently we are talking that CSF and blood sugar ratio is important, which is not applicable to the newborn. It is not applicable. Even any blood sugar less than 30 in the term baby, less than 20 in the preterm baby, CSF sugar I'm talking, is indicating that is the cutoff value for this acute bacterial meningitis. Regarding the cells in the term baby, more than 30.
More than
Up to 30 and we may consider normal. 20 cells in a term baby may be normal. But the preterm, even the more than 20. Preterm baby, more than 20 cells, that is the cutoff value for this considering the importance of the cellular reaction. And regarding the protein, more than 150. In the older children, we consider even more than 50, 60, 80 high. But that protein may be normal for the newborn. But if the more than 150, again it is indicating bacterial meningitis. So for the newborn, sugar less than 30, protein more than 150, and cells usually more than 30. These are the cutoff values which we should remember for the interpretation of the CSF for the acute bacterial meningitis in the newborn.
Sir, no, that. Sir, Abhay, sir, any comments?
Nitish?
Sir, Chetan bhai.
So that is very well said. Hypoglycemia may not be a feature in newborn. So what we feel the serum blood sugar and CSF sugar. And second most important point for newborn, what happens is whenever we think of doing the CSF, usually newborns are very sick. So hemodynamically they are very in a very bad shape. That is one catch. Second thing is many a times it is very easy to get the blood in the CSF. Immediately as soon as go in, the bloody tap is very common in newborn. So that is also a practical problem because we depend so much on the CSF. And unfortunately, we come up with the blood in the CSF, but like bloody tap. So that is the 2 points which are important.
I think when the bloody tap, if you get it,
Yep.
and if you have the clinical picture of meningitis, start the treatment of bacterial meningitis.
So if you are not,
Don't rely upon the CSF.
yes.
Repeat the CSF after 72 hours and hope that it shouldn't be traumatic. That will help you.
So
Or even you can go for this latex antigen test.
consider it is positive if it is a bloody tap and you start anti-meningitis treatment. True.
So, sir, something you suggested, if we move to that, and Chetan bhai, you can help us. So, these are things which is available, so gram stain, very available, culture, biofire. So, when should we use those and where they are more helpful? So, like rational use of investigations.
I think because see, culture is must. We should have the CSF culture along with blood culture because many times you don't get something in the CSF, we get in a blood culture. So if we get a pleocytosis and simultaneously blood culture positive, even if you don't go and get CSF culture positive, you have to consider it as a positive, and that organism you have to treat it. If we have both the same organism, that is the best thing to have, like blood and CSF culture, we get the same organism. So that is a second possibility. Now gram stain, yes, it is not going to help you much, but yes, whenever it comes positive, it gives you immediate response. Like if you get the result positive, that means you don't have to wait till the culture result is available. So you have to take a chance and ask them to specifically prepare for gram stain, because 20% of the cases it might be positive, but that 20% will be benefited a lot. That is the, and yes, BioFire is available. There is a meningitis panel is available where you get a PCR based this multiplex PCR based investigation, and where we may find the organism which are not been picked up by the culture. So now it is very much handy, and gradually now we are using it more frequently, and we are getting a positive result and reliable results also. So I think in a coming days, I think this will be a need of an hour and an investigation of the choice, and maybe a routine, because it is costly nowadays. So we are not going, or when we have pakka case of meningitis, we might not go for it. But yes, when you are in confusion, like a aseptic meningitis sort of thing, it will be a really helpful tool to reach to the diagnosis. This aseptic meningitis is any organism. So there are other organisms which can be picked up by the BioFire.
And more importantly, even herpes simplex and listeria. These are the two which are not usually very difficult to grow on culture. So they will be picked up.
So I think HSV, if we can take only HSV PCR only, that will be cost effective. So
But
that otherwise,
if there is a clinical suspicion, but if in general, if BioFire is the most important organs that are picked up at this.
yes.
I think a word for the BioFire. It's a good investigation, advanced investigation, but it is not required routinely in our neonatal practice or any practice. I think our routine practice will do it, but suppose if I fail the way in which I was expecting and the patient is not responding, or even the clinical picture is something different, then I think next time when I go for the CSF, definitely I will go for the BioFire, which will give me something unexpected, which I have not thought of. But I think routinely, once in a usual course of the neonatal meningitis, I will just treat it. I will send the culture. Culture will not replace the BioFire or anything in the future also. So that I think that is very another point which, on the contrary, two parts are lacking in our practice. Gram stain by the pathologist, sending the culture by us. So I think these two things should be corrected, and I am sure that they are rewarded. BioFire, yes, when the thing is required. And very rightly, Dr. Abhay said, and even Chetan said, for the herpes simplex, PCR herpes simplex, I think on the contrary, you say that BioFire, it will be masking. In spite of that, you may not get the positive or may not be the control say. And therefore, they say that suppose your clinical suspicion is very strong for the herpes simplex, send the PCR for the herpes. And all of us know herpes simplex can be diagnosed by the PCR only, not from the CSF picture or anything. First, suppose PCR is negative, very strong for the herpes simplex, repeat it even after the second. And two PCRs for herpes simplex negative, exclude the herpes simplex in something else. So I think this should be very clear in our mind.
Can I ask questions, sir?
Yes.
But if we have first CSF done, and it is confusing picture. So as you said, after 2 days or 3 days, when you repeat it, you prefer to go for PCR, right? Is it? So PCR will not be negative with the treatment.
No, PCR is not going to be negative.
Okay, so that way we can utilize it. It's a good way to utilize that investigation.
And second thing, the imaging has more important role also. Suppose if PCR is negative, but there is a neurotropism for the herpes simplex, and that can also give an indirect evidence.
I think if we understand the PCR in details, the things will be very clear. PCR is giving the genome sequence of that particular organism.
Living or dead.
If it was present, you can decode even better.
Yeah.
No, so that's very helpful. So, use of appropriate nutrition, especially PCR, can be still very helpful if your mixed picture or antibiotics given or it was bloody tag. So now, I mean, I'm combining few questions and giving an open question. So there are two scenarios from here. You are starting appropriate antibiotics, and child is improving. If child is improving, how long do you give antibiotics, and when do you repeat LP, or do you repeat LP? And the second scenario is, what are you doing? Child is not improving. In that case, when do you repeat LP? I can start request Abhay sir, or I mean,
Yeah,
who
yeah.
else?
So in a neonatal meningitis, repeat LP is a must, number one. You have to repeat after 48 hours and
We are not able to decide the organism. So the one right answer, 3 weeks IV antibiotics.
okay. That is also good practical answer.
After meningitis should be treated by
Yeah,
IV.
because culture may not be there.
That may be the theoretical question that I will get the positive, negative, but I think irrespective of it, I will go for the 3 weeks IV and IV. No intramuscular, no oral at any time. I think regarding this, responding. I think clinical response, I cannot rely on the newborn. I will have to rely upon the CSF response. Therefore, second CSF after 72 hours to see that the antibiotics are working. And third, at the last, suppose without any problem or complication, to see that yes, it is detailed. And then I can stop it. So 3 times CSF is must in neonatal meningitis. In the older child, the good response only once.
And if the child is not responding, then we have to investigate further in the form of imaging, and we have to look for the other complication like subdural effusion, ventriculitis, cerebral infarction, something like that.
That's great. I think that's a
I
next
wanted,
question.
sorry, Nitish. I wanted to
Yeah,
ask
please.
one question to all our experts. It's commonly experienced when we do a lumbar puncture in neonates, where it is very difficult to get entirely, a normal CSF even at the end of therapy. So you see a few cells here and there, and even the sugar, it fails to correct itself completely. Why would that be the case? And is that the consensus of experts as well?
Should I
May I
answer?
comment? Yes,
Yes.
you first, then I will second.
Actually, what Siddharth said is the common scenario.
Yeah, exactly.
And,
I don't know.
and you should not be even after the cells. That if the cells are normal, I will continue the antibiotics. No. Some cells even may remain there because it's an inflammatory process.
Yeah.
Even some protein may also remain high, but suppose protein is coming down, it is not going up, not going for any complication like hydrocephalus, I will not bother. Most of but the sugar comes normal, or at least nearer to normal. So sugar comes to normal, but cells should be some, I will say hundreds, less than hundreds. It should never be high. And that to declining. So cells are declining, few cells has remained, protein is significantly coming down, sugar is almost normal, then I will not match with it normal CSF. Consider that the patient is treated for 3 weeks IV antibiotics, no any problem, complication, discharges, it will not create any problem.
So I agree. Cellular response is last to disappear. That is most important.
It's
And
very
sugar always remains borderline. No, but that is important. Now, so in our first question, what was CSF sugar is not important. I would say it is very important. Only what Bardave has said that we should not match with the blood sugar and the
Blood
CSF
sugar.
sugar. Like a hypoglycemia
CSF
is very, very important. On the contrary,
CSF
it is one of the sensitive and specific marker of the neonatal meningitis in the absence of cell.
CSF sugar is always going to down.
Ah.
Definitely. The only thing that with the ratio which
The
we
ratio is
compare
not
in the-
important. Yeah.
That ratio on the contrary is not required. It should not be done. It is
So
not going to be
decline-
helpful.
So declining the cells as well as the protein and sugar parameter along with the stabilization of the child. That is
Yes.
also very important. We have to see whether what are the parameters and how the child's hemodynamic status is improving or not, whether it is stabilizing or not.
I think at the time of discharge, it will be hemodynamic stable. But what I would like to see, head circumference. That it is not unduly enlarging. Anterior frontal remains normal. Sutures are widening, opening. No any point of hydrocephalus. Neurologically active baby, taking the breastfeeding well, start gaining the, I would say, weight. These are the parameters to see. Hemodynamic baby is going to be stable.
No, at 48 hours. I am talking about 48 to 72 hours when we are doing the LP and we are not getting a clear normal picture. That's why at that particular point.
At 48 hours, sterilization of CS is also important.
Yes.
Not only biochemical, sterilization. Say if
Yes.
our antibiotic is working, by 72 hours, you will get the sterile fluid.
And don't miss to take the CSF second time.
Yeah.
That's very important.
So that's very
And-
good point. No, so that's very helpful. So this crucial point that we must do LP like for diagnosis, 40 to 72 hours, and at the end of the therapy. Sir, he's already trying to touch one point, like complicated meningitis, because we are talking about head size, child is improving on. So when should we consider that meningitis is complicated? So what investigations help us, and what are the things we'll be looking for?
May I?
Sir.
Yes, yes.
So if the child is clinically not improving, anything which is there in the CNS is improving will be reflected in systemic examination. So if the child, suppose very high grade fever is or hypothermia is there, some thermal stability is there, and the child starts taking feeds well, convulsion, seizure, all that movement, the lethargy, all will disappear. That's clinical side. But if suppose the child has got the anterior frontal which goes on becoming more and more boggy, I will suspect probably the child is going for some subdural effusion. Suppose the head size increase, it may go for the hydrocephalus where the suture becomes more wide. And sometimes there is localization, localized seizure, focal weakness, they all indicate stabilization. And sometimes there are some vascular event may also occur. Sometimes some infarct are there. They can be picked up with the help of the imaging. So common complications of subdural effusion, ventriculitis, and infarction.
That's very helpful. And sir, of course, you can add. And what role of neuroimaging here? So
I think yes, already you have come to that question. If any patient is not responding to your antibiotics satisfactorily, and when you are planning to change the antibiotics, before that, go for the radio imaging.
Sir.
Most of the times, I think resistant to your antibiotics may be the issue, but less common. More common is the complication. And for that reason, go for this radio imaging. I think radio imaging point of view, usually ultrasound of bedside is desirable. It's, I think, in your routine practice. Now, my year to practice is very less, or I think I may be out of this year to practice. But I think that's good that the ultrasound should be bedside and routine it should be done. And it is a very good informative. That standard protocol is there at what time it should be done. Second, even suppose if you are suspecting some more complication like ventriculitis, subdural or something, or even uncontrollable seizures, then always go for this contrast enhancing CT or MRI. Nowadays, the people say that more desire the MRI rather than even the CT scan. And I'm sure that when you are suspecting the complication, you should go for this radio imaging. But I think it should not be the routine in every patient without any problem. Radio imaging, sonography, yes, ultrasound should be even before discharge or even in between. That is very important. And I think later on you can go for assessment of other things, but radio imaging assessment is good. It's required.
And when you discharge and do a sonography, some reactionary subdural effusion will be persistent. It is something like our cell, which may not be. So that should be differentiated from subdural empyema and a normal reactionary fluid, which is common with infection.
I think many times I have seen what Abhay has mentioned. It is not truly the subdural collection. Many times what happens that with that, there is some oozing of the CSF. That is what the people say hygroma, CSF hygroma, I think. Because with the inflammation and cerebral edema, when suppose you are that too aggressively somebody has given mannitol or something, there is a shrinkage of the brain and there is leakage of the CSF, which is collected in the peri-brain area, which people are, I have seen that even these radiologists, they will interpret subdural collection. In true speaking, when once you compare the density, then you will say density is just like CSF. And I think it's not empyema, it's not infusion, nothing is to be done. And you see in the follow-up, everything will disappear.
Nitish, can I add?
Please, Chetan bhai.
So here when we are talking about a complication, there can be two types. One is the acute sort of, so which we are expecting after say 48 hours or so. That is one thing. And in that particular, we know that it can be a cerebral edema or raised intracranial pressure or a ventriculitis. That is going to be the first thing. Now, ventriculitis is a complication which cannot be picked up clinically. That is very sure, which is very difficult to pick up. So when you think that child is not improving and we have done the CSF, which has not been cleared, I think there at that particular time, ventriculitis is suspected. And many times what happens, the bedside sonography, cranium, ultrasound cranium, that is the very handy tool where that will give us the idea about what is the size of ventricle, whether ventriculitis is there, even intraventricular hemorrhage is there or not. So this will be a most important tool. And I think everybody now are having that in-house ultrasound machine. So you should take help of that first. And when you are like thinking of a long-term, like a bit chronic complication later on occurring, there I think if after doing this thing, if you're not clear, we can go for the, as sir said, MRI. And MRI will be of more useful rather than CT, contrast enhanced MRI to be done, because that will give us a cerebral edema, that will give us an idea about whatever the cerebral abscess or whatever complication of ventriculitis that can be picked up. So role of USG cranium is very important.
Intraventricular debris and clots are very consistent finding. And once you pick up, you have to do a ventricular tap. And if the CSF, CLR more than 50, you have to become more aggressive. And
again, I think about for the ventriculitis. Nowadays, fortunately, with the good antibiotics, ventriculitis, we don't get the common complication, the way in which we used to get in the past. I think that credit goes to the third generation cephalosporin.
Yes,
but,
exactly.
But suppose the baby is preterm. Ventriculitis is more common with the preterm baby. Preterm baby clinically not improving, your CSF is not improving, think that this ventriculitis is likely complication, and you can confirm the way in which Chetan has described.
So I think it's very nicely covered a few topics, and we'll speak.
I think wind up this meningitis. Please remember.
Some voice is breaking.
Bardeo sir, hello. I think Bardeo sir's voice is. While sir joins back, I think definitely a comment and expert comments that we all think that bacterial meningitis is straightforward, but no, it's a very difficult aspect while you're treating, starting from diagnosis, management, and how about the prognosis? Because at every stage you want to discuss with the family that, sir.
Prognosis is always not good. I will start with that prognosis is not always good. I will not say prognosis is good. And one of the, it usually tells 10 to 12% of the mortality as per the literature. And even if the mortality is not there, it has quite a bad morbidity. Child may have a post meningitic epilepsy. Child may have got the hydrocephalus. There may be some cranial palsy, some hearing loss. So a lot of problems are there. So the prognosis is not that good.
I think there is. I think there's some problem with the Baldev sir's he will join back. Yeah. So if Ankit bhai, can you have the next slide, please? So if I summarize, it was fantastic.
I want to one line itself.
Sir, please.
If you have got the meningitis picture clinically, and if all the bacterial paramarkers are absent, then even in absence of other stigma of the herpes simplex, we have to think of herpes simplex meningoencephalitis. That is very important. And second thing, even if in spite of good antibiotic, if the child is not improving and is a premature child who has been catheterized on gazettes, always try to rule out the fungal infection. As far as Candida is concerned, same blood culture plate is going to be helpful. But if you are thinking of non-Candida infection, you have to also ask for the laboratory to have other fungal culture. So these two important messages I want to say.
So that has been very essential. It's wanted to cover more questions, but we thought, but that's very helpful comment. We can now move to second clinical topic, that's acute flaccid paralysis. So again, sir, very interactive inputs from all the experts, and I'll hand over to Siddharth for AFP. Siddharth.
Yep. So, yes, so we're going to go from a neonate to a grown-up child now. Again, it's the rainy season, and we're going to start seeing quite a few patients who come in with weakness or limping of acute onset. So let's look at the case. Next slide, please. So a 10-year-old boy who has been previously fit and well, he complains of pain in his lower limbs the previous day. He's had some sports, he had been outside. Parents thought, give him some massage, give him some paracetamol, and he went to sleep. But next day morning, he's unable to sit from sleeping position. So when he gets up in the morning, he needs some support. He's feeling weak and difficulty in walking. He definitely couldn't go to the toilet without support. So on examination, when you see him in clinic, he's afebrile, absolutely afebrile, weakness proximally in both the lower limbs when you see him on the couch, slight weakness in grip in upper limb as well, and reflexes seem depressed all over. So Chetan bhai, again, something we see, would you like to comment on, what you think could be the possible first diagnosis, but also with a slightly broader differential diagnosis?
Yeah, here I think patient has been presented with a very short history, maybe only a day or two, and that patient has been progressing very fast from just complaints of lower limb pain to the weakness, and child is not able to walk or even stand up. So I think there is a weakness which has progressed very rapidly. So yes, first thing will come to my mind is of course GBS, because that's the ascending paralysis. That is what happening. And also, yes, we have not seeing the poliomyelitis, but I think the patient was having a pain in the limb. That was what a complaint. And then the weakness has progressed. And as we have seen that also is possible in this. So this just generalized classification, it falls in the acute flaccid paralysis, we can say. Whenever the weakness is there, less than 5 days, and that particular group of the disease is flaccid paralysis. So if you try to think the causes, depending upon history, it looks like this too. But it can be from upper motor neuron to almost the neuromuscular junction to muscle, it can be there. Because in upper motor neuron also, initially there can be hypotonia and weakness, and then there can be that reflex will be strong. So I think differential will be these two for me at present, because the weakness is going like that.
Yep. So wonderfully described. I agree. I think in India, acute flaccid paralysis in the form of GBS, maybe AIDP or AMN variety, and poliomyelitis also to be kept in mind. In particular, I think, Chetan bhai, poliomyelitis, we have not recorded cases for the last 3.5 years, but I think vaccine-induced poliomyelitis, is that something that you were...
That we have to keep in mind. But 10 years old vaccine, oral polio given is less, like almost nearly not possible, because usually this occurs in early doses of polio, that too oral, and though that too the patient has not received any injectable polio in that situation. So even the pulse polio, this child will not receive. Otherwise, that also, but otherwise vaccine derived, it doesn't look like because of vaccine.
Perfect. Can we have the next slide, please?
Baldev bhai wants to say something.
Yes, sir.
See, that's only one point with that reference, that whether polio is there or not, less than 15 years, it is mandatory for us to report it.
Yes.
Okay.
We'll have to report it. And it is possible that you may get it even. On the contrary, what is the acute flaccid paralysis for this, even for the reporting, that any patient less than 15 years, but even at any age, if the polio remains one of the possibility, even adults, you are supposed to report it. And once you report it within 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours, 2 samples of the stool apart 24 to 48 hours should be sent to the this accredited laboratory for the polio study. It is must, it is mandatory, it is a part of this polio eradication, and that will have to follow.
Yep, it's part of our duty. I agree.
Yeah.
Sir,
Can we-
he was asking, Baldev, I think you hardly heard. He was asking whether it can be because of the polio itself, this poliomyelitis.
Yes, it can be.
No, at this 10 years of age.
Yes, 10 years.
No,
It is
10 years we
very-
don't give polio
It is very-
vaccine.
It is very, but that child has not received, but some another child.
Circulating virus.
Circulating virus. Yeah.
That is actually the stool, and that circulating even the strain can be become, and that can cause the polio. Even in animals, it can cause.
So
Very
it
rare, very rare, but the possibility remains.
Even
So
they can call out.
circulating vaccine-derived poliomyelitis, it is possible if there is in contact, some patient is there, he has excreted the virus in the stool and he has got that
Absolutely,
infection.
absolutely,
But
absolutely.
we are not going to find out the source. It can even cause outbreak also. So totally,
Yes.
it
Okay.
can,
Interesting.
But the point is don't neglect the polio when even it is remote possibility or you consider no possibility, but still do it.
Yeah, true.
Ankit bhai, next slide. Okay, let's stick to this slide. So, of course, I put three important differentials here. Of course, in this patient, we had GBS. Chetan bhai mentioned upper motor neuron. So, I put myelitis as a possibility here. And lastly, also in the season where we're seeing viral infections, myositis again can be a very important differential diagnosis. So, Abhay bhai, how do we differentiate myositis, or what will be the presentation? And if I was to ask you one diagnostic investigation for myositis, which one would we be doing?
as far as the Guillain-Barré syndrome, myelitis and myositis, they are all three different things, but the presentation is almost same. In case of myelitis, there is either a quadriparesis or paraparesis. There will be a typical sensory cutoff, we can have a sensory border, sensory, what I would say word. We can have a typical demarcation. And sphincter disturbances are more common. And in the early stage, when there is a spinal shock, there is areflexia, but it will be followed by a hyperreflexia and hypertonia. As far as Guillain-Barré syndrome is concerned, there is some preceding viral illness is there. There is symmetrical involvement, lower limb more affected than lower limb. Child might have some pain. Sphincters can involve, but not usually either. And cranial no palsy, especially 7 no palsy is common. And in CSF, there is albuminocytological dissociation, which is not there in case in cancer myelitis. As far as myositis is concerned, again, a typical viral prodrome. Child may often have high-grade fever, come with a limb pain, and the pain in the calf and in the quadriceps is very typical, and there is quite tenderness. And it's a clinical diagnosis. It's a clinical. Upper limb are less involved than the lower limb. It can involve, but most of the time, lower limb are more involved, especially the calf muscle. As for investigation concerned, GBS, I would like to do a CSF as well as no conduction study. For myelitis, it is the MRI. This is the only drug. CSF, so some pleocytosis. Otherwise, and for myositis, we have got the enzyme test.
Yes, sir. Yes, please.
I think Siddharth, only one point to understand and to remember. Albuminocytological dissociation, what we say in GPS.
Yes.
CSF should not be done at the time of presentation or actively. That should be done after 7 to 8 days. Why there is cellular reaction? Why there is cellular reaction and not the protein? The reason that the CSF in the erectile space is actually extended up to the root of this root ganglia.
Yes.
And later on from that, the cells are oozing. Protein is not oozing. And therefore, you will get the protein in the CSF, cells in the CSF, but not the protein. And that takes some time, about 7 to 8 days. And therefore, if you want to see this albuminocytological dissociation in the GPS, do the CSF after 7 days. And that's a process that it is not an inflammation. It is not due to the inflammation or infection. It's a part of this oozing which you are getting. And I think this is just that might happen so.
Yes. So, yes, Chetan bhai.
That myositis, I think out of GBS, myelitis and myositis, we as a pediatrician see the maximum myositis.
Exactly. Number of
So, yeah, number of cases. A typical history in this particular child of myositis is patient will complain that child was absolutely normal previous night. In the morning, child is not able to get up from the bed, not able to move the foot and the down on the floor. And as the day progresses, patient will give better a bit. Will be able to starting walking and all that. So yes, and then pain will be massive. And if you touch the gastrocnemius or the calf, it will be painful. So typical history, early morning, getting up out of the bed, is having extensive pain, not able to walk, and gradually as the day goes, might walk somewhat. So in the OPD, then he came a bit better.
Yes.
I think-
So thank you. Very important clinical clue.
pain is the most important feature.
I think when the child is not walking, the
Yes.
first question will have why you are not walking? Due to what? It is due to the weakness or due to the
Or
pain.
pain. Yes.
I think in GBS and the transverse, particularly GBS, due to the neurological problem, weakness. Here the pain is more. And with that, if you go for the CPK, which is sky high, I think make the points very clear.
And for
Yep.
GBS, what happens? I have seen whatever patients, the patient will be having typical around 10 years old child. They won't be able to scooter पर बैसे ना तो पाछड़ पग चढ़ाई ना बैसी सके. That is the first sign. Patient will not be able to take the limb that up one. And second thing is will not be able to climb the stairs. And then because they will be able to walk initially, but they start climbing the stairs and sitting on a scooter. That is the first complaint what
Yes.
the patient say. And gradually
Yes.
then they
So-
start taking that
Yes,
weakness
so
ahead.
Chetan bhai, what you pointed out is that you have to understand the pathophysiology. So GBS is a neuronopathy. It's not a purely nerve disease. It is anterior horn cell to nerve. And so what happens is you get proximal weakness more often, but you can also get distal weakness. You see patients present with foot drop as well. So you can have a combination. It
Yes.
is often patchy as well.
Yes.
And the same thing as in this case, in the upper limb there was distal weakness, whereas of course in myositis you are not going to see that. You know, you
Exactly.
won't see this kind of patchy distribution. So wonderful discussion on the clinical clues. I think together you've all mentioned the investigations as well. So GBS, CSF can be done, but clinically we know that in the first week it won't be very helpful.
No
So-
conduction velocity.
Yes, so nerve conduction velocity can be extremely useful. We all do it in our clinics and we are able to do it and immediately give a report. The other investigation you can also do in early stages is an MRI spine with contrast. And you will see anterior horn cell enhancement on the MRI spine, which can be a very, very important clue as well. For myelitis, it's fairly straightforward. You do an MRI spine with and without contrast, and you will be able to see change. And in myositis, as you've all mentioned, the CPK test is often helpful. So we've done that. Now, I'll of course move on from AFP because we've got
Siddharth, only one point. Even in a myositis, if you go for the DTR, they are elicited.
yes, but
Which means,
with muscle inflammation, you can have
Yeah.
depressed reflexes as well.
yeah, depressed.
So it can be a little bit confusing between GBS and myositis with the depressed reflexes.
But in GBS, radiculopathy is there. Here the muscle inflammation is there. In GBS, the pain is because of radiculopathy. And here it is the muscle inflammation. Yeah.
That is correct. So again, pain will be most prominent in GBS and myositis. In myelitis, you don't expect pain together with it, especially
Even-
limb pain. You can get back pain, but you wouldn't be
Yeah,
expecting
very
limb
big.
pain.
Even in poliomyelitis, yes, we are not seeing it, but it is a very painful. Myalgia will be there and sensation will be intact.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
that is typical of it.
Because
And-
again, it's an anterior horn cell disease.
Yeah. And therefore the tripod sign was there.
Yeah.
Yes.
Due to the pain, child was not able to sit.
Spasm.
Yeah, we have seen, I think, Abhay, we have seen plenty of patients.
Even I was fortunate that to see.
Yes.
Unfortunately, fortunate.
Unfortunate.
Yeah.
Unfortunate. Unfortunate.
But fortunate for learning.
Yeah.
Yes. So wonderful. So I think the way we need to comment on enteroviruses as well in general. So poliomyelitis we've just discussed, and then enterovirus, other numbers 71, others which can give rise to acute flaccid paralysis of upper motor neuron type as well.
So, Siddharth,
Yes.
it is very important enterovirus 71 because we are seeing many cases of hand foot mouth disease.
Yeah, that's
And
important.
so we are being trained and having a fixed concept that yes, it will come away, nothing will happen. It is not that. We have to keep a catch of it. If it is enterovirus 71 and
Yes.
we and the patient are unfortunate, the child might go for this complication and this thing. So you have to keep in mind this can happen.
Yes.
Yes.
We have a number of cases and they are mostly of Coxsackie. But if someone comes for enterovirus 71, you have to think of cardiac as well as the CNS complication.
Absolutely.
Correct. So I'm just looking at the clock, and it's amazing how with discussion 1 hour has gone by, and we were able to address 2 scenarios. What I would want to say is, and I'm sure Nitish and Sanjeev bhai might agree, is that we can quickly run through the rest of the slides. We might not discuss it in detail or not discuss it, but at least give some food for thought on the other scenarios. So next slide, please.
Dr. Siddharth,
Yes, sir.
do we have some time bound as far as this?
I don't think so. I think as long as the participants want to be
If
here.
participants want it, then we may continue half an hour more.
Don't be in a hurry to finish. You can
What?
stop
We
and
can stop, but we'll do it in a better way. But that is why my suggestion.
Fantastic. I mean, we've got enthusiastic panels, so no worries.
we have another time also, anytime.
Yes.
Siddharth,
Yes, Nitish, carry on.
So we can add something which is very hot at the moment, is a vaccine. That's on vaccine, not about routine vaccination, immunization.
Okay, let's go to vaccine then.
Because those are things which doesn't come to everyone spontaneously.
Routinely, yes. Okay.
Routine.
So do you want to take us through vaccines and neurology?
God, please. So can I have next slide, please, Ankit bhai? So this is just the beginning slide, just to take the height. But the point is, there's so much which happens in neurology that we don't think of immunization. And patients are routinely seen by our and our seniors who can guide us. That sometimes we out important part of vaccination children. So let's common questions. There's a 9 with normal birth, development, neurology, no signal. Had 2 typical febrile seizures, 7 months and 8 months with this infection. He comes to you for routine immunization at 9 months. They scared of vaccination because they have heard that that previously can have a fever and that can lead to further seizure. So here you are, that 9-month child with 2 febrile seizures, typical one with the URTI, and they want to go to the vaccination. There is no question they don't want to give vaccine. But how do you counsel and what things will you do, sir? So you can either Abhay sir or Bardev sir, anyone can take, sir.
Yeah. So see, this is a common scenario. Any child who comes from 6 months to 5 years, they are prone to febrile conversion, number 1. Second, this is the age where from 6 months to 2 years, almost all vaccines are going to be there. And there are a number of vaccines which are now available in a public sector as well. So if it is an affordability issue, probably they may have some alternative. Let us leave it. So now here the child has got a 2 conversion. And the most of the reactogenicity is mainly associated with DPT. And that too pertussis component of the triple antigen. Now, here luckily the child is 7 and 8 months. So probably DPT part is not there. So what other vaccine will come will be a measles containing vaccine, that is MMR. And then it will follow by typhoid conjugate vaccine. If the flu vaccine, which has not been given at 6 months, and then will comes the booster of DPT after 1.5 years. Now, so there are 2 issues. Immediately MMR, not this reactogenicity is not there, so that counsel in that way. The real counseling part comes especially when the child is due for the DPT vaccine, that is 1.5 years. Now here it is very important that presence of febrile conversion or history of febrile conversion is not an contraindication to DPT vaccine, number 1. The only important contraindication is severe allergic reaction, that is anaphylaxis to any component of the vaccine of any vaccine is contraindication. And suppose if the child has got the encephalopathy following the DPT, within 7 days, then it becomes an absolute contraindication. But suppose the child has got very high grade fever and febrile convulsion, or the child becomes some hyper-responsiveness, or incessant crying, they are the precaution. So
Sure.
it is most important that you have to spend a quality time with the patient. You have to remove some myths associated with the various vaccine, because there are certain anti-vaccine lobbies also there, and they go on printing so many things in the media. So that part also should be in a 1 or 2 sentence should be explained. And number 3, we can give an option of a less reactogenic vaccine. That is from DTWP, you can switch over to DTAP. But here also, you have to use a word of caution that this is 100%, not that this is going to be a non-reactor. It is definitely not reactor wholesale, but some reactogenicity can be associated with this. So these are the situations. I will touch only conversion part. Other neurological problem, I think Dr. Baldova is there, Dr. Chetan is there, about autism, neuropathy, encephalopathy, will take that part. But I will touch about the encephalopathy and DPT part, or febrile convulsion and DPT part.
So that was very precise, very helpful. Ankit, we can hear change of slide, please. Next slide. And sir, as sir rightly pointed about the vaccine, we must go ahead, contraindications. But maybe sir, how about the DPT and also something on encephalopathy?
I think already Dr. Abhay talked very nicely. Among all the vaccines, I think since all of us are practicing since more than 35 years, if I have given the vaccine in the evening, and if we get the phone call, the first things to my mind whether the DPT was given. The reason probably we are more afraid of the DPT, rest of the other vaccines, by chance some problem, they are always minor. So no issue. So I think as a pediatrician, yes, you take it seriously. DPT also may be too life-threatening, or I will say absolute contrary for the vaccine, which we should remember. Number 1, anaphylactic, I think which you are going to face at the time of giving the vaccine or within the short time. Second is the encephalopathy. And encephalopathy, if somebody is asking, I must have seen at least 4 to 5 patients referred to me following the DPT, pertussis encephalopathy. In 2 patients, even they come with the help of the neurologist. So don't take it, I will say that lightly also. The point is, but I think with the reference to febrile seizure, even after 24 hours to the DPT, it's not the contraindication. Very absolutely what he said, they are relative. Compared to even more than 3 hours excessive crying or hypotonic hyporesponsiveness episode, or even I will say febrile seizure, all these are the relative contraindications. That means, I will say rather than contraindications, you have to take the time, you have to explain them properly. But the vaccine is not the contraindicated. Only anaphylactic, pertussis encephalopathy have been proved, then I think they become the contraindication. Then omit the pertussis, go for rest of the vaccines.
So even DTAPS cannot be given. You have to omit the pertussis vaccine.
Pertussis component as a whole.
If encephalopathy and anaphylaxis occurs with DTAP or DTP, that particular P part should be removed. Only DT
That is most
should be
important.
given.
So it is not a wrong notion that we can give DTAP. No, we cannot also give acellular pertussis.
And Chetan, your comment on something on neuropathy or sometimes we see after vaccine.
I think that, let the Chetan answer.
No,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
You finished. You are halfway. You finished.
I think most of the times, rather than neuropathy, particularly with the DPT, if it is not given deep intramuscular, it causes a nowadays we don't give on these buttocks fluted regions, so probably that problem is less with this anterior aspect of thigh, lateral aspect of thigh. But when people used to give on the buttocks, this was very common, the injury to the sciatic nerve. And that injury was responsible for the neurological manifestation. Per se, I will say vaccine probably is not creating the problem of the neuropathy. But yes, DPT is very painful. If it is not given deep intramuscular, it can create the problem.
No, that's very helpful, sir. So important points on which vaccine to give, which to avoid.
May I add something?
Sir, please, Babese.
There are 2 important situations. One is vaccine-related encephalopathy, and second is vaccine-induced neuropathy. So, pertussis encephalopathy we already discussed. But sometimes there is a post-vaccination ADEM is very common. You might be seeing number of cases.
ADEM, GBS.
That I would remind. GBS is not there. ADEM. ADEM has a definite link with the vaccine. GBS is a myth. It is usually not there. Some cases of has been increased after a flu vaccination, but it is not. It's some statistical relation. It is not an actual relationship. Is there? Second, I would say that aseptic meningitis is more common with MMR. Then CVDPD with oral polio vaccine, that is more common. And yellow fever fever vaccine has also some CNS coverage. So as far as the encephalopathy and neuropathic ulcer, these 4-5 vaccines are, I want to.
Yes, absolutely right.
That's very helpful. And sir, something to add, someone who is known to have febrile seizures with past vaccines, I'm not on DPT, even with can be given during consulting hours or is it daycare, like some temperature control, and even the clobazam prophylaxis can be something helpful as well, in addition to routine precautions. So I think this will be very clearly covered. Now something more on vaccines. Ankit, can you change the slide, please?
Nitish,
Yes.
Please.
can
Chetan
I add, just talk about, can you go to one back slide?
Yeah.
You mentioned it, Dravet syndrome. I think we should, because I had one patient just few days back only. This is like, nobody must be knowing, but many of us may not be aware of this, because this Dravet syndrome, it is very typical because it starts in the first year of life with typically febrile convulsion 1 or 2. And those are the convulsions which are lasting long. It is difficult to control, frequent, and 2 or 3 episodes are there. And most of the time they are coinciding with unfortunately, the vaccination episode. So it has been, causally related to because of vaccination it is happening. And usually it lasts long, 10 to 15 minutes. And even the child is absolutely normal. There is no developmental delay, absolutely healthy child. And this patient then gradually, if you see at that time, EEG may be normal initially. So gradually, if you see, there will be one family history of similar complaint. I had that patient having a family history of absent seizure in the father when he was young. So that way, and then gradually when go ahead, we get one more episode of myoclonic jerks. And there was one absent seizure. So then it unfolds and ultimately we come to know, okay, this is not simply a febrile seizure, but it is a Dravet syndrome. It is not the vaccine induced something, but it is a genetic mutation which is happening and causing that voltage gated sodium channel mutation. And that ultimately we can come to know later on if we go for a repeat EEG and we can get a diagnosis. So it is very difficult, and sometimes the treatment is also very tricky because valparin and clobazam, that is a 2 thing which should be given. So I think this is an important syndrome. We must keep in mind that it can happen.
Sure.
And secondly, carbazepam and eptoin are the contraindication.
Contraindication because
and it's a very classical. There is a febrile status followed by myoclonic joints and neuro regression, and all that occurs during the period where the child is due for the vaccine. So vaccine is blamed, but actually it's a genetic mutation.
And many times it can be provoked by a hot water bath. We have seen if it has been exposed to heat or something like that, they will get this sort of episode of convulsion. So that is very important, and it should keep in mind that every time it is not that. If we go into genetic mutation and everything analysis, we can come to know that this is the syndrome.
No, that's very, very helpful, and that's important point. Well covered, Chetan Bhai and Bhai sir. And we all know three important things like next. Ankit Bhai, can you change the slide, please? So we know that vaccines can be very helpful for meningococcal, pneumococcal, H. influenzae kind of sensory infection. But this practical question to again panel is: we may have children who are immunocompromised. Let's say they're on steroids for waist syndrome or some other immunomodulation because of so many other conditions. So which vaccine we should give and what should be avoided?
By the way.
Anyway, I think Abhay is working in the vaccinology. Let him answer.
Okay. No, I was previously already asked. Anyway, suppose if a child is on steroid, and there's a typical dose for the steroid to decide whether the child is on immunocompromised or not. So if the child is 2 mg per kg and the duration is more than 2 weeks, probably it's an immunocompromised state. And in that case, live vaccine should not be given. If you want to give the live vaccine, you have to stop the steroid for 1 month. Ill vaccine can be given, but the efficacy is going to be little less. So if there is no hurry, probably it is better to delay both the vaccine. Live absolute contraindication Inactive vaccine, you can give if the risk of infection outweighs its efficacy. That is the simple matter steroid is concerned. Now there are now number of monoclonal antibodies are available now also. So that again, there is no studies are available, but on in general, what the expert in the world says that you have to stop it. You have to delay the vaccination by at least 6 months, Better more, but at least 6 months should not give it. So that is about steroid.
I think any immunoglobulin or monoclonal antibodies, then minimum 3 months, preferably 6 months. Vaccine should not be given.
And as far as, yes, Chetan Bhai, please.
Other than this steroid, if there is a immunocompromised conditions, and as Abhay said that you will never give the live vaccine, but by chance you need to give inactivated and kill inactivated, you know that it is going to be the immunogenicity will be suboptimal. You might have to increase the dose, you might have to double the dose, and you have to add additional dose. That is also the situation sometimes in immunocompromised host.
No, that's again very helpful. So because so many children are on steroids and immunocompromised, so they should know and they come to our colleagues for routine immunization. So when they come to center, they should know what to do. So we have so many other children who have either muscular dystrophies, some muscle disorders, who are very prone to chest infection, recurrent respiratory infection, or who have cardiac and lung complications. Any specific vaccines they should be on? I don't know about say yearly flu or pneumococcal or something, or suggestions, please.
This DMD and all the patients who has got the myopathies, their respiratory muscles are going to be very, very weak. Not only the skeletal muscle, but respiratory muscles are also going to be very weak. Second, if by chance the infection occurs, the clearing of the air passages will be very, very difficult because there is a what I would say that it's a neurogenic type of the respiratory illness will be there. So it is better to prevent any respiratory infection in that. So in that, the most important thing comes to be an influenza vaccine. And second one is a pneumococcal vaccine. These two vaccines are very, very important as far as this DMD patients are concerned. And not only the patient, their relative or all of those who are coming in contact with them should be given this vaccine so that that infection from the contact should not be transferred to a child who is suffering from the myopathy.
So many times it happens.
And as far as MMR vaccine is concerned,
Sir.
usually what we say that we MMR or chickenpox we gave after the age of 3 months or second dose after 5 years. But this is a situation we have to have an accelerated schedule. So you have to give the second dose within 4 or 6 weeks. So that when the child is immunocompromised, when the child is on a steroid dose are going to be stepped up, probably you may not have to further delay the vaccine. So always grab the situation and finish the dose in an accelerated schedule.
Many times people think otherwise because the child is having some CNS problem or suppose muscular dystrophy, they try to avoid the vaccination. So that should not be rather they need this vaccination very badly. So it is not always that if it is a progressive neurological disorder, then only we can just withhold vaccination. Otherwise, vaccination is going to be helpful in this particular situation. That is very important point to be made clear.
I think that's very good point.
And one of the relative contraindication, I read today only. I don't have any experience, so I may not be given deep answer. One sentence is there in the CDC that if there is a progressive neurological disease going on, it itself is a contraindication to the first dose of DPT. Means the child is not vaccinated earlier and comes at 4 or 5 years. But as going a progressive active muscular disease, then you have to delay the dose of DPT as well.
So acute, see, it's a progressive neurological disorders. CNS disorder progressive, then it is.
But they have not given any explanation for that. This is a sentence they have read.
No, but this has been standard statement. Okay, any progressive neurological disorder can be, you can withhold, but otherwise static neurological disorder, you should give it, like cerebral palsy.
I think it is more too particularly with the pertussis component.
Yeah.
Any
This is
vaccine.
more too for the pertussis component.
Yeah.
And sir, one clear comment, which is that MMR does not cause autism, because we have seen so many people dying from measles, mumps, rubella, and unfortunately that when wrongly interpreted paper or data that autism had created havoc. But now it's again very clear, MMR does not cause autism.
MMR does not cause autism. MMR does not cause diabetes. Flu vaccine does not cause GBS.
That's great. So I think this is
And MMR does not cure corona.
I think that part we'll have to keep it. That part we'll have to keep as a comma, not the full stop.
Yeah.
Work in progress.
Were there multiple full stops?
No, sir.
To be continued.
Sir, I think we can decide as a panel what we want to do. So I think
I think regarding vaccine, at least one message for all the listeners or viewers. I hope that there must be some viewers for them. That if the vaccine is indicated, first decided if it is indicated, hardly the contraindication is there.
Yeah.
On the contrary, even in contraindication also with some modifications, provisions are there. What I mean to say that no child should be left unvaccinated just on ground of some, I will say that considered or presumption of the contraindication. Even for the rabies, one sentence is that if it is indicated, there is no contraindication for the rabies. Even the pregnancy, even lactation, immunocompromised, any stage. The reason we know that it's almost if the rabies develop, life has gone. So I think, and with other diseases also, they are on the contrary, saving is more important from either the sequelae or deaths rather than the relatively some contraindications. So I think that we should consider.
that again, sir, very helpful. I think I just asked a comment. Is sir, we all three means me, Siddharth, and Sanjeev were there. Sanjeev finished a very good job of settling a patient with some accurate.
Yeah, we have it's like
Sanjeev, do you have any question or any specific you want to ask to our experts?
like all queries and important questions has been addressed wonderfully well with their experience and knowledge. So thanks.
No, sir,
I don't have any question right now.
It's not okay. So still we are waiting for. this was just anything from the question of meningitis or vaccine. Now, sir, we can decide how we want to do. It's 2023. Perhaps we can, as suggested nicely by team, we can do further session and discuss detail or how we want to do.
I think, Nitish, if there are any questions, you just check it out from the audience.
Yeah,
Finish
that should be addressed. Yeah, good idea.
And then we can stop it because then it will be almost 1.5 hours.
That's
Yes.
We can do it at another time.
Chetan Bhai, I've just checked and no, there aren't any questions at the moment. So I think we, Ankit Bhai, can we skip a few slides and get to the end of the presentation? Yep, we can skip that. Okay, we can probably stay here. So Sanjeev Bhai, would you like to do a vote of thanks and also?
Yeah, definitely. I just from team RICN, I would like to first thank all our esteemed guest speakers, BSP sir, Abhay Bhai, and dear colleague Chetan. Thank you for being with us for so long and given your expert opinions for many different queries, basically. And also, I would like to thank all the participants for their enthusiastic and active participation. And as the slide is showing here, I would like to tell to attend even tomorrow webinar part 2. Again, interesting presentations by experts in the same field, pediatric neurology. They are from a different part of Gujarat. So definitely, everyone, you will enjoy this another interaction tomorrow. And thanks again to all of those who have attended. Yeah.
No, sir, again, thank you very much. And I
Thank
think
you very
we will
much.
take this as a part 2 because our still few topics are remaining. So I'm sure everyone will enjoy this lively, nice interaction. So many practical knowledge and practical share of the skills. So that's
It is like Baldev always says, okay, either you do 1 or 2, but do it complete.
Yeah.
He doesn't like to stop it halfway. So it is very clear that whatever you discuss it completely. Don't stop halfway. So I think it's our time to say thank you all 3 of you for giving at least me the opportunity. All 5 of you that to be on a panel with such a learned panelist is really my fortune. I'm thankful to all 5 of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.